Great. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor. Thank you very much, Jelko, for introducing me. It's a little bit unusual, I think, for the United Nations, the bastion of egalitarian values, of good governance, of human rights, to be addressing a panel on corporate social responsibility, where corporations' mandates are very much perceived to be different from those of the UN. But what I'll do is walk through a lot of the reasons why I find our views or our goals to be completely convergent with what corporates should aspire to in the short, medium, and long term. The United Nations, going back, I guess, about a decade, advanced a program called the Global Compact. The Global Compact is now an international global event that comprises hundreds of companies in many, many countries, and it's based on more or less 10 commandments or 10 basic principles that are intended to help guide the relationships between corporations and their governments, and basically the way corporations function themselves. The things that the UN talks about are pretty conventional. They're things that you would suppose the UN would focus on. These are things like safeguarding human rights, promoting respect for labor standards, protecting the environment, and fighting corruption. Now that's the UN line, and these are all very noble principles, and we hope that these principles will be mainstreamed into corporate behavior in all realms, bank, non-bank, manufacturing, production. And although we support the commandments, what they tend to miss a little bit, and again, you have to consider the origin. The UN presented these commandments for the purpose of inspiring a dialogue between corporates and society, between corporates and the public sector. But I think it goes a little bit further. And so here's where I break from the convention of being from the UN, and I want to talk a little bit more about the specific business practices that I think serve as a model of what corporate social responsibility can be and should be, and what it means to us here in Serbia. In other work in other countries, I've also advanced with corporates, associations, and individual companies a set of principles. And the principles track very nearly on what the UN is proposing, but they're a little bit different because they have a stronger emphasis on the bottom line. I'll come back to that thesis, but in order for corporates to be good corporate citizens, to exercise good corporate social responsibility, you have to be profitable. CSR is not about philanthropy. It's about a way of doing business. It's about the way that we mainstream different behaviors in what we do. And again, I'm not only speaking from the perspective of the UN here, I'm also speaking from the perspective of my own experience working with a merchant bank in New York and then with Merck Pharmaceuticals, which I know many of you know, because Merck, in many regards, is a strong model of corporate social responsibility here in Serbia. But the themes that we talked about in these other countries, again, are not going to be unusual or unfamiliar. It's about transparency and openness. Now, why do we want to be transparent and open? Well, it's good to provide information to the public so that they can serve as a watchdog, as an overseer. The better reason, from my perspective, if you are open, you will have access to credit. If you produce accountable, robust financial statements, you'll have access to debt and ultimately equity finance. If you're not open, you don't get money, and then you can't grow. So the notion of being transparent and open is really about a business process. If you don't produce robust and unqualified financial statements, it will be very difficult to grow. And so we look at it, again, for all of the purposes of promoting democratic values, but again, there's a very strong business angle to this. The second principle is about upholding the law and its enforcement. What this comes down to, quite simply, is adhering to all of the relevant laws associated with your operations, manufacturing, labor standards, but it really comes down to paying your taxes. Corporates, in order to be good corporates, in order to practice good corporate social responsibility, have to pay their taxes. They're enjoying benefits from the state, and there's an interest in ensuring that we comply with all of the relevant tax laws. A number of years ago, Warren Buffett, who many of you may know, runs a very, very successful company, Berkshire Hathaway. He himself has alternately been the richest or second richest person in the United States and in the world. But in his annual report, which is always a fascinating read, he talks about when current management took over at the Berkshire Hathaway Company. And he and his buddy Charlie Munger took over the Berkshire Hathaway Company in 1965. So current management has been management for the past 45 years. They've run an ethical company. But 2 years ago, he, in his annual report, described Berkshire's policy on paying its taxes, which is to say, they pay everything they owe. And then he reverse engineered the impact on the U.S. fiscal system if every corporation simply paid what it owed, instead of avoiding through a variety of loopholes and tax havens and others. And according to his estimate, the United States could abolish personal income tax if only the corporates paid what they owed. So consider the power of that statement for a country. What could be accomplished if a fiscal deficit could be closed? Household wealth would increase, personal spending would increase on things like education, health, and all of the things that we value for our kids and our families. But it also means the state can then pay for education, which is something that I consistently encounter in all of my work in all countries, is an undervalued investment by virtually every country. And if we don't invest in education, I don't see how we hope as individual societies or as a global society to progress. So upholding the laws and its enforcement is a second key principle. Then we look at the responsibility for the safety of people and the environment. Safety of people is pretty self-evident. We, as good corporate citizens, have to ensure that our workers are protected, that they work in a clean, safe environment, because their health is fundamental to the health of our company. If the workers are on leave, or if there are other missed days or whatever losses due to health or other injury, then that impairs our bottom line. The environment, again, I think, following closely on the heels of the Copenhagen discussions this past 2 weeks, is indication that business as usual with regard to the environment isn't going to work anymore.